You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast. We're very excited here today because we love when an author returns to see us a second time. They already know we love them, but it must mean that they like us a little bit too. And we've got Jenny Colgan with us here today from her castle in Scotland. Is that where you are today?
Actually, I'm in my apartment in Edinburgh. That sounds awful, doesn't it? I know. No, but I'm in town because it's a school day, so the kids are at school. So.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you back. We're here to talk about the fourth book in the School by the Sea series, and it's called Studies at the School by the Sea. Kristen and I thoroughly enjoyed it and really related to it. But before we dive into that, let me give you a little bit of Jenny's bio because it's always so interesting. You probably already know she is a New York Times bestselling author and a Sunday Times bestselling author. She was born in Scotland. She's lived in London, the Netherlands, the United States, and France. I love in her bio where she says, I eventually settled in one of the wettest of all places, and she lives in North Edinburgh with her husband, Andrew, her dog, Neville Shute, her three children, Wallace, who is 11 and likes to pretend that he's to be 19 and not knowing what this embarrassing family thing is that keeps following him about. I thought that was cute. Michael Francis, who is 9 and likes making new friends on airplanes. He must be very outgoing. Delphine, who is 7 and mostly a raccoon as far as we can tell. That was so cute.
Do you know that is quite? We haven't updated the bio, and do you know Wallace now really is 19? That's nuts, eh? Oh my goodness!
Wow. Okay.
To get onto that, eh? I know how funny. Do you know, but that actually was really nice to hear because, of course, you know, children move so fast, and you're so specific at the time. And I had forgotten Michael Francis's airplane. Do you know why? It was awful as well because if they had, we wouldn't let them have any devices. So if they had like an iPad and he was nice to them, sometimes they'd let him play with it.
We all have stories like these. You know, I love when authors put some of their personal life on their bio because then it feels like we really get to know you. And on a serious note, however, Jenny has won a lot. She's been into the Love Stories Hall of Fame inductee. She's an RNA Best Romantic Novel of the Year, RNA Best Romantic Comedy Novel of the Year. Two wonderful achievements. And this book does not disappoint. And we're thrilled to have you back with us today. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you. It's very nice to be here.
Well, Jenny,
keeping warm.
Oh, yes. I'm right there with you. Jenny, we like to give our listeners a little bit of what's going on in your story. So if you'll allow me, I'll just give a very brief summary and I won't give away any spoilers. But we're here to talk about Studies at the School by the Sea. And this is the fourth book in this School by the Sea series. And for those fans, and I know you've got many fans that have stuck with you for many years in this series, we encounter Maggie Adair again. She is a teacher at the prestigious Downey House boarding school that is on the English coast. And it was there that she learned what it meant to be a teacher and developed her career and even started a relationship with a colleague of hers, David. Now, these days, Maggie is a little bit restless because she has the pull of her family back in Scotland. And she's really at a crossroads about some things in her life and where to go next. She's not exactly sure where life is taking her. But we also see some of her favorite students reaching that crossroads in their lives as well. We have Mercurial Fliss, we have Glamorous Alice, we have Hardworking Simone, and they are also coming to that wonderful point where they have to make these adult choices going forward. Did you want to add anything to that summary? Because I don't want to give any spoilers away.
No, that is a good summary. Thank you.
Well,
Good.
wonderful. Well, Chris, why don't you kick us off?
Well, I have to tell for our listeners, it is a delightful story that sometimes made me laugh, but also really touched my heart. We all can recall our difficult and sometimes happy high school years. These are emotional times of discovering who we are as an individual and how we fit into the world. I love in your story when Maggie and David joined the expensive private school, Downey, with the impoverished school, Philip Dean. They brought these kids together who may have never met each other or found each other. And I saw something in these children. They saw each other. They began to maybe understand each other. And I had to ask you, as the writer, why did you bring them together? Do you believe that it helps us to see each other more clearly when different backgrounds are forced in a place? And are we all more alike than different, maybe, when it comes down to it?
Well, of course, that's true. But I think there's also the case of schooling as a moral question. And it's particularly strong here in Britain, where a lot of people privately educate their children. Less so, I think, in America. And certainly when I lived in France, very few people privately educate their children because the system is very good. Whereas here in Scotland, the system is horrendous. It's really bad. But what you do every time you take your children out of a bad education system, you're then, then the schools kind of tend to get worse. So it's really, it's complex. And that's why I wanted to put the two schools together, particularly when better funded schools have so many things. They have theatres, they have sport, they have music that underfunded schools simply do not have. It's just not fair. So I was looking at it.
I felt there was a very purpose of that in the story. And I also loved that through these youth, we saw that whether you grew up with nothing or whether you grew up with lots of money, you still had issues, concerns, problems, hurdles going through the school system and growing up. Money didn't guarantee happiness. We all know this as adults in the real world, but kids don't always know that. I loved this coming of age and realizing who other people were that you added.
Yeah, I mean, adolescence is difficult for everyone, and I bet when you were an adolescent, your parents would say, well, you have so much more than we ever did, and you're so much luckier than us, and we used to walk 5 miles to school in the snow and all of that. And the thing is, of course, it didn't mean anything to you. It's not relevant. You swim in the water that you're swimming in. And it's all kind of, and my husband and I are the same. We're all like, oh, we were up at 6 working and stuff like this. But it doesn't change matters for the adolescent that you are, the teenager that you are. You still have difficulties with friendships and, like you say, identity. And I think there's very few writers. I think I know one writer that had a really good time at secondary school, and she's a sensational tennis player. So I think it actually had more to do with that.
Probably so. I think maybe it's 1% who really can look back and say they loved you call secondary school, we call high school. Yes. Yeah. I thank you for bringing all these issues out. It was a lot of fun to look back.
Oh, well, I think, yeah, I think one thing I really try and impress in my own kids is it's very much it's not the rule that you enjoy senior school, it's the exception. I think we're terribly guilty of expecting our children to have a good time all the time, when one, that is not possible, and two is, I don't want them to feel that in some way. My daughter's in what we call second year, which means she's 14. And telling any little girl that year of school, the year you turn 14, is a great year, is a fat lie. So I wanted to manage expectations as far as school is concerned.
Absolutely. Jen, I want to ask you, kind of switching gears a little bit, because you had this beautiful romantic theme running through your story. But David did something we don't see too often anymore. He wrote love letters to Maggie. Now, sometimes they were his words, sometimes they were the words of other writers. But I want to ask you, did he need a little help expressing his feelings? And is this a lost art?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, I started this series in 2007. So it's a long time. I tend to write it when I have a little bit of quiet time, which has been extraordinarily difficult because the difference in young girls, because we're following girls through 6 years of senior school, and the difference in young girls from 2007 till now is frankly horrifying. And I wrote these books as a tribute to the 1950s boarding school books like Mallory Towers that I grew up on. This is, I love to read them, and I wanted to read another one, but they also looked at the lives of teachers. And in fact, weirdly, when I'm writing now, I feel as far away from my characters when they started as I did. It's like reading 1950s Enid Blyton to look back on the first books of the series. This is how long this series has been running. The original, in the original, Simone, who's the scholarship character, I plucked her surname from a legal case. You take names from all over the place that I thought was just a nice name. And I wrote it in, and her original name is Simone Kardashian. And nobody ever notices because it wasn't a thing. That's how old this series is. So
Wow.
yeah. It's just been, and then we changed it. It's the only thing we changed. And David, who's the English teacher, is already a man slightly out of time. He's old fashioned for when I was writing this 20 years ago. He's that very classic kind of English school teacher. He's English. And so then in those days, yeah, he wrote letters and he expresses himself through the poetry that he loves. He's a bookworm, and that is not always necessarily the right way to live your life. Sometimes you just have to face up with things. And of course, he's used to being terribly charming, which he is, and writing poetry, which is lovely. But to a point, when you're having a real relationship, then, you can't live on poetry alone.
Absolutely. You had said something that made me think about this. A study just came out this week talking about the impact on young girls of social media and how it's particularly been harmful for them. So when you talk about the difference between 2007 and now, well, you are spot on, and that's backed up by research now.
It's so weird, the difference in expectations for girls in their young teens. So weird. And then there's other things that have changed too that didn't occur to me at the time. So when I started writing, there's a girls' school and a boys' school. And now we would be much more fluid about who goes to one school or another school. We would care a lot less. But here's the thing, right? I do try, in this world where the news is so awful all the time and it floods at us all the time, I do try and hold on to the fact that when novels were invented or became widespread, there was a terrible mass panic that novels were going to be the ruination, particularly of women. That novels were very dangerous. When pop music came along, older people were horrified that it was going to destroy. When television was invented, I watched hours and hours and hours of so I do try and hold on to the fact that, every single time something new comes along, older people have an absolute breakdown about what it's doing to young people, and that we run the risk. And I have to say, when I look at my daughter's Snapchat, whatever, which I do because I have access to all their phones, it's a lot of rubbish about mascara, and it doesn't feel like anything terribly more frightening than us on the phone in the hallway, if you remember, attached to the wall, talking to our friends for hours and hours and hours. So I have to think that, you guys, about all the news. Otherwise, how would anybody get up in the morning?
That's
Yeah,
a good
it is
point.
overwhelming. Yeah.
I remember when MTV got started and I came home
Yes.
from school and would lay on my stomach in front of the television because I could see my favorite band for the first time ever. I would just sit there
Yeah.
for hours. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I came through that just fine. Well, maybe, I don't know, still.
No, well, no, it was very common, not amongst us because we weren't particularly well off, but with well off people in Britain, we only had 3 and then 4 television channels, of which 2 were the BBC, of course, and then 2 were commercial channels with commercials on them. And you weren't allowed to watch the channels with advertisements. That was considered to be morally terribly degrading.
See how far we've come? That's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about a little love triangle in the book without giving any spoilers about who ends up with who. We have Maggie, who we love. We have her ex-fiance, Stan. We have her new boyfriend, David. It goes around and around with concerns and friendships and love. But the reader watched Maggie and we realized what looks good on paper doesn't always feel good in the heart. How tough was it for Maggie and for all of us to ignore our family and friends and just pursue a love interest that maybe other people might not agree with or that maybe doesn't make sense?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I think it's difficult and it gets harder. And you're kind of, particularly when you're young, you're like, oh, I'll go out with whoever I like and I don't care what my family think. And then you get older and you find that actually you do kind of care what your family think. And in this case, Stan is her boyfriend from when she was at school. They've been together a very long time, and he's Scottish. He's from the same background as her, whereas David is English and he's not from the same background at all. So her family have concerns, and Stan was kind of originally, when I wrote him originally, he was kind of just the guy that she left behind. And then he became kind of just a much more involved character. And he's not a go-getter guy. He works in a forklift truck and he's not terribly glamorous, but he really loves her and that means something. And also he knows her, he's known her all her life, and that means something as well. The people that knew you back then are the people that knew you best of all. So yeah, so there you go. So she's got choices to make and they're not all made, I don't think.
Not yet. And that I loved carrying that through the book, wondering what she was going to do, because I really loved both of these people. But it sort of made the reader think our reasons for choosing a certain person to love are not always the best reasons. We go with a lot of different things, heartfelt emotion, the poetry that one person's writing, a history, like you said. It's not black and white, is it? Look, who you choose does not mean that is the correct person. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, we know that it's true for a fact, but also it's endlessly interesting to me. I love terrible reality TV shows. Like I think you have Love Is Blind and we have Married at First Sight, which is where you basically just get married. And the funny thing is, for all the fun and the drama, every single year there's always a couple who make it. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine? They make it and they have a baby, and and you hear from them 5 years down the line, and that is astonishing to me that actually statistically, and I was from my mum saying that, saying there's loads of people you probably rub along quite well with. Don't just basically if you meet someone that's pretty nice, then you have as good a chance of having a go at it, because it's such a crapshoot. You must know couples that you thought were perfectly matched who have absolutely, the wheels have come off on fire. But also there's people that got married that I thought, my God, you two should not be getting married. That are still 30 years. It's amazing, the whole thing.
It is.
So
it's kind of fun.
Never get. It is fun.
It makes for a great romance book.
I think, the funny thing, because the series has taken so long to come together, and particularly between, I think, book 2 and book 3, there's a massive cliffhanger. And my publishers just started to get a lot of mail. People thought that perhaps I had died. Or we used to get letters saying, oh, I'm going in for an operation. Would you mind just telling me what happens with Maggie and David, just in case I don't come out from underneath the anaesthetic? And so we were kind of compelled to carry on with the series, really. But it's funny, I've been writing them for as long as I've been doing anything.
That's awesome. I want to go back to David for a second. He reflects on the fact that at his former school, a promising but underperforming student would have the benefit of a psychologist, of special education teachers, and really any extra help that they needed at any turn. But at the new school, the students were generally underserved and maybe even a little tough. What did he do to address some of these inequities? And was this a sticking point between he and Maggie at any point?
I think it is really difficult to be a teacher. Both my parents were teachers, and they both worked in what we call the state school system, which you call the public school system, which is the opposite of what we mean. When we say public school, we mean paid for schools. And good teachers, of course, like to go to good schools, which often mean private schools with small classes and well-behaved children and a lot of support. So then they take the good teachers, and then the problem gets worse, because then the less good teachers are in the state system and so on. Gosh, you could talk about it all day. So I think when David loses his job, or is put on suspension because of his relationship with Maggie, he starts at a very difficult school and really finds his calling. And I think good teachers doing good work in bad schools are heroes, absolute saints, getting up every day, having to feed the damn children. It's extraordinary what these people do. So I didn't see a way for at least one of the characters to remain characters that I am fond of without behaving morally well. In David's case, which is trying to turn around the despair you often find in bad schools. And then, of course, from the other side, Maggie bringing the privileged school in to offer up its facilities and to share as much as they are able what they do.
Yeah.
So it's very funny, though, I think we should say. I'm getting into like a long diatribe about education policy, which is not what I mean. But I think when I started writing these books, as you just read out, the children were very small. And we were in the French, we lived in France. The French system is wonderful. Yeah, wherever you are, every French kid in the world, including, the French Caribbean, turns the same page of the same book on the same day. It's completely standardized. They have no discipline. They have very few discipline problems. There's an expectation of how you are in school. And that's not really the case in other places. So it's complicated.
Yeah. Well, as with all of your books, there's an element of romance, of humor, but also of learning about these different systems and how people interact. I love the relationships that you explore. And of course, we love having you on the show. You've been on a couple times, and we just think this was a delightful book. What, though, is on your radar next? Do you mind sharing a little clue?
I am currently I'm having so much fun. Quite often my heroines are quite young, in their 30s, and I want to write about women in their 50s, real women in their 50s. So not either like super old or super glamorous or, browbeaten by the menopause, they can't move. I just want to write about real funny women dating in their 50s, and I am having an absolute ball. I'm having so much fun with it. It's really making me laugh.
I love it.
We were just talking about it. Okay, so before you came on, we were talking about all different ages of dating. And I read this. Can I read this little passage from the book? I loved it so much. I read it to Kristen. I'm not going to give a spoiler. It's 2 secondary school, high school students. The girl says, "Nobody ever kissed me goodnight before." The boy says, "Sears? Like seriously?" And she says, "Oh, it doesn't matter." He says, "Are you holding out for someone special?" She says, "No, I just want somebody nice." And he says, "Well, I'm quite nice." And I just loved that. It just warmed me and it made me laugh right out loud. And then Kristen and I got into this whole little discussion on the importance of kissing and when is the right moment to kiss and when isn't the right moment to kiss. So I'm kind of glad you're doing something with people in their 50s, because whether you're young or old, we can all relate to this. It's sort of very romantic and wonderful.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think the sense that, you've got a kind of quite a small, if you have a family on both sides of things, you've got a very short window of time between the little ones not needing you and the older generation really needing you. I think you've got a very short amount of time to run out and have as much fun as you can. And so
Ooh, I can't wait.
I
We can't wait for this next book.
mean.
Well, I want to tell our listeners, Jenny, how to get in touch with you. They can find you on your website at jennycolgan.com. You are also on Facebook, on X, on Instagram. And once again, we just want to thank you so much for coming on to discuss your
Oh,
book. It was absolutely delightful, and we hope that you come back.
thank you. Yes, anytime.
Always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, Kristen, that was a lot of fun, as always, talking to Jenny. She gets me laughing. She's got such a great sense of humor in the writing of these stories, but yet I felt this was a little heartfelt too. And I have to ask you, so, okay, we have Fliss, short for Felicity, Simone, Calvin, all in high school believing that they're not good enough, they're not pretty enough, they're not popular enough, they're not athletic enough, nobody likes them. They needed someone to show them that they were good enough. Do we need that in life? Maybe even not even high school, but all throughout our lives. Do we need somebody, whether it's a love interest or a friend, who has the courage to come up beside us and say, hey, you're doing just fine. You are good enough.
Yeah, I think we all need affirmation, especially at vulnerable points in our life, like when you are a teenager, when you're a little unsure of things, or when you're in your 50s and you find yourself maybe single again. That's why I think we joke about a word of encouragement making somebody's day. I think that's true because we all need that affirmation at one time or another, haven't you?
Absolutely, especially in high school, but even now, like I said to Jenny, yes, these are young people that we're reading about, some of the characters in this book, but we can still relate to them. I was just with a friend of mine who's turning 70, and he said, honestly, Chris, I don't feel any different than when I was 20. You look different, but you still have the same emotions inside. And so, what did you think about my little kissing? I really want to talk a little more about my little kissing excerpt from the book because I just thought it was so sweet when I can't say who said, well, I'm quite nice. I loved it. This little romance is, we love it no matter what age.
Yeah, and I think that romance being a lost art, I think that's somewhat true because we're so used to a quick text or quick constant communication that we don't think maybe about going in a little deeper and telling someone how you really feel about them and doing it in a way that again is very affirming but also romantic. And I know I appreciate those gestures and I'm sure you do as well, but we got to kind of slow down a little bit and dig in to those emotions and then express them in a way. I think that's wonderful.
Did you like the
Yeah.
poetry that David wrote in the book? Did you like the poetry that he wrote or that he borrowed? I have a theory on borrowing other people's work. I'm not saying this cut and dry, but it's very easy to take something that someone else has written and use it, even if you don't feel it, because there's a power to it,
Yeah.
a romance to it. And I feel it's on an entirely other level when you write something yourself. It doesn't matter if it's good writing, say a song, uh,
Yeah.
no matter what it is. I think it is. Am I wrong in thinking that's more personal?
You know, I'm a I don't know how I feel about this because there are some people who have a problem expressing themselves. And so when they see something that encapsulates that, they want to share it because they really do mean what those words say. For example, a song, like people will send a song and the lyrics to somebody because it's exactly what they want to say. So I think that those are nice gestures. If you rely solely on others' words, I don't know, maybe that gets into a different territory. What do you think?
I think I don't have an answer, but I like your answer. I'm going to take that one. Sounds perfect. You're right. Go ahead and use it. You're right. Because I do love old fashioned poetry, but it is really good when you can say something from your own heart, even if it's not fancy. And
Yeah.
you're right. I think romance is a little bit of a lost art, maybe a little. There could be
Yeah.
youth out there today who say you're wrong, but that was a lot of fun, as always.
I
Fourth
know.
book in the series. Fantastic.
And with Jen, you can always count on that romance. That'll be there, which is very wonderful. Well, I'd love to tell our listeners, which by the way are in 80 countries or territories, all 50 US states, more than 1,700 cities. We have loyal listeners. Are thankful for you. We just thank you for sharing our socials. But I do want to tell you about who we have coming up. We've got a little list, and it's actually quite a long list. So I'm going to keep it short. Kate Quinn, Janie Chang, they're coming on together. Mary Kubica, Christopher Reich, Amiko Jean, Bonnie Jo Campbell, J.D. Barker, Dervla McTiernan, Scott Carson, who also writes as Michael Carita, Kate White, Lisa Wingate, B.A. Paris, Hank Philippi Ryan, Ramona Osabel, Jill Shalvis, Lisa Barr. This is quite a lineup. And I cannot wait till you hear these wonderful interviews that we've had with these authors. In the meantime, we would want you to connect with us at bookstormpodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on X. We are on YouTube. We have 125 plus authors that we have had deep dive interviews with. These are unique. And I think that's why people are sharing our socials, because we do dive deep into all of the issues that we are facing in our daily lives. This isn't just fiction. Until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep with life-changing fiction.